The think tank called them back 3 weeks after the first session. The wealth fund proposal had gone public in the interim. A major lab CEO had pitched the administration on equity stakes to seed a public dividend fund for American citizens. The room had options. The moderator opened without preamble. Is the wealth fund a genuine wealth sharing mechanism, or is it a bailout being positioned before the crisis arrives? The room did not wait either. This is the Economists room, Reconvened, Jobs Part 21. The think tank called them back. The conversation had moved faster than anyone expected. Disclaimer. The following is a composite of conversations happening across economics departments, policy think tanks, and research institutions. The participants are fictional. The debate is not. The same nondescript conference room, better coffee this time. The whiteboard from the first session had not been erased. Nash equilibrium. Velocity versus absorption speed. Who funds the retraining systems, the capital access programs, the geographic distribution of opportunity, and when? Nobody admitted to writing the last line. It had appeared before the session started. The moderator did not wait for the room to settle. The administration is in active discussions about acquiring equity stakes in leading AI companies. The proposal, which originated with at least one major lab CEO, would have AI companies donate equity to seed a public wealth fund that distributes returns directly to American citizens. I want to know what everyone in this room thinks that proposal actually is. The room did not wait either. The ambitious CEO went first. It is a wealth sharing mechanism. AI generates enormous productivity gains. The gains accrue disproportionately to capital. The fund corrects that imbalance by giving citizens a direct stake in the upside. It is elegant and it is overdue. The skeptic did not let him finish. It is a lab CEO proposing that the government take an equity stake in his company. Think about the incentive structure that creates before you call it elegant. Once the government holds equity in those labs, it also holds powerful incentive to protect them from competition, from regulation, and from failure. That is not wealth sharing. That is regulatory capture dressed in the language of populism. The ambitious CEO shook his head. You are describing a worst-case interpretation. I'm describing the structural incentive. Intentions are irrelevant to structural incentives. The government took equity stakes in banks in 2008. We called it a bailout. We are now being asked to do the same thing proactively before the crisis and call it a dividend program. The mechanism is identical. The branding is different. The macro forecaster had been writing since the moderator finished Theo's opening question. The bailout framing is premature, but the underlying concern is legitimate. The proposal draws a parallel to the Alaska Permanent Fund, which distributes oil revenue to state residents. The service logic is similar. A natural resource generates wealth. The wealth is shared broadly rather than captured entirely by the extracting entity. The skeptic cut back in. The Alaska analogy breaks down immediately. The state of Alaska owns the oil. It does not own a minority equity stake in the companies extracting it. The wealth fund proposal inverts the relationship. The government receives equity from private companies. That equity comes with obligations the Alaska model does not carry. If the fund holds equity in a major AI lab and that lab faces a solvency event, what is the government's posture? Does it let the equity go to zero? Does it intervene to protect the fund's value? The moment you ask that question, the bailout framing becomes structurally accurate, regardless of original intent. The labor economists had been waiting. There is a prior question, the dividend math. If the fund is seeded with equity stakes and distributes returns to citizens, what does that distribution actually look like in the first 5 years? Equity stakes in pre-profit or thin-margin AI infrastructure companies generate returns on a long horizon. The insurance analyst we discussed last session needs income replacement now, not a quarterly dividend that might materialize in a decade if the fund performs. The ambitious CEO shifted. The fund is not designed to replace income. It is designed to share upside. Then it does not address the displacement problem. It addresses the inequality problem on a different timeline. Those are not the same problem. Conflating them is politically useful, but analytically dishonest. A moment of silence. The administration representative had been listening with a carefully neutral expression. The moderator turned to him directly. What can you tell us about how the proposal is being structured? The representative said, the details are still being worked out. There is genuine interest in the highest levels in ensuring that the productivity gains from AI are broadly shared. The skeptic smiled without warmth. That is a non-answer. It is an accurate answer. The anti-AI lobbyist leaned forward. I want to make sure the financial engineering conversation does not crowd out the question my constituents are actually asking. They're not following equity stakes and dividend structures. They are following their electricity bills. The bills went up again last month in the 3 regions where the data center construction is most concentrated. The cautious CEO looked at her carefully. What would engagement with your coalition actually require? Not the opposition version, the conditional version. What are the terms on which that consistency becomes workable rather than oppositional? She considered this. Transparency on resource consumption projections before permits are issued. Community benefit agreements that are enforceable rather than aspirational. A genuine answer to who bears the infrastructure costs when the data center leaves in 15 years because a more efficient architecture made the facility obsolete. The conditional camp is not opposed to AI development. It is opposed to bearing costs it did not consent to for benefits it does not share. Address that specifically and the coalition fractures. Ignore it and it consolidates. The cautious CEO nodded. That is a more tractable problem than the anti-AI framing suggests. It always was. The anti-AI framing serves people who want an enemy. The conditional camp wants a negotiation. The macro forecaster looked up from her notes. The geographic distribution of costs and benefit is the domestic version of the trust problem the trade economists raised last session. The national productivity gain is real. The local cost is also real. They do not land in the same place, and neither did the political pressure. The anti-AI lobbyists continued. The political coalition forming around this is not the coalition this room assumes it is. It is not just environmentalists and campus activists. It is the middle-class homeowner watching electricity rates climb. It is municipal water authorities modeling supply shortfalls. It is the small business owner who cannot afford commercial rates that data center demands is driving. These are not radical constituencies. These are the constituencies that determine midterm elections. The ambitious CEO looked genuinely uncomfortable. The energy and water concerns are legitimate engineering problems with legitimate engineering solutions. Renewable build-out, closed-loop cooling, the industry is actively investing in both. At what pace relative to deployment pace? She did not wait for an answer. The deployment is moving faster than the mitigation. The gap is where the political pressure is building. The skeptic walked to the whiteboard. He wrote beneath existing lines, wealth fund or bailout prepositioning, local cost, national benefit. He turned around. There is a pattern in what we have discussed today and what I want to name. Every proposal on the table addressed the symptom while leaving the underlying coordination problem intact. The Nash equilibrium we identified last session has not changed. Every firm still has the same rational incentive to deploy aggressively. The wealth fund does not alter that incentive. It provides a political buffer against the consequences of it. That is not a solution. It is a delay mechanism. The administration representative spoke for only the second time. Delay mechanisms have value when the alternative is crisis. The capitalist, who had been listening carefully, broke a long silence. He's not wrong. The question is whether the delay is being used to build absorption infrastructure or simply to postpone the political reckoning. Those produce very different outcomes on a 10-year horizon. And the firms I work with that are navigating this well understand something the delay mechanism conversion keeps missing. The people being displaced are not a liability to be managed. They are a network. Former employees become customers, partners, founders, and acquirers. The way a company handles this transition is a decade-long asset valuation problem. The wealth fund does not address that. Neither does the community benefit agreement, though it is closer. What addresses it is treating the social contract not as an obligation you are exiting, but as an infrastructure you are restructuring. The labor economist looked at him. That argument applies to firms with enough runway and sophistication to think in 10-year horizons. Yes, he said, which is why the policy question is who builds that infrastructure for the firms that cannot or will not. The moderator looked at the clock. They've been in the room for 2 hours. I want to give everyone a chance to respond to something the capitalist raised before we close. He used the phrase social contract as infrastructure. I think that framing deserves a session of its own. Same group, next week. The whiteboard when the room cleared. Nash equilibrium, velocity versus absorption speed, who funds the retraining systems, the capital access program, the geographic distribution of opportunity, and when. Wealth fund or bailout prepositioning, local cost, national benefit. Social contract as infrastructure, or social contract as exit.